All right, good evening. It is 7:14, and I am calling the curriculum, it's 6:14 p.m. on Monday, April the 16th. I'm here to call the Curriculum and Evaluation Committee meeting to order. Committee member Mrs. Van Twyver, who usually chairs this committee, is either, I believe, delayed this evening, so we're going to get started without her. I'm here, Heather Raymond. Gloria Timmons is also here. Raymond Guarino, Dottie Oden, and Doris Hohensee, and of course Dr. McKinney is here as well. So on the schedule tonight, we have a discussion regarding the reading intervention programs, and I believe Dr. McKinney has some information for us. Excellent.
So included in your packet is a review of two of intervention reading programs that are used in the district. And we'll just kind of go through each one separately. And just to keep in mind, these two programs are for students who have language-based learning disabilities, challenges with reading, writing, spelling, speaking, and listening. So the first one is Orton-Gillingham, or a lot of people say Ogee, which is a structured, multisensory, systematic, diagnostic, prescriptive, individualized literacy program for students with language-based disabilities. It's a very intense training that a teacher would have to go through, 1 to 2 years of a graduate level course, over 60 hours of training, a supervised practicum, and the approximate cost on this sheet here is $2,500. I've seen it up to about $3,800, $4,000. So this is a program that's used for Tier 3 and Tier 2 students who are struggling with reading, who have some challenges with language. Very prescriptive. You have to be highly trained. This is a program we're working on getting to all our schools. We're not quite there yet, given both the cost and the time commitment that it takes for teachers to go through this. The name that you have on your handout here, Holly Levine, is one of our reading specialists, and she's one of the people in the district that helps out with this sort of programming. Underneath Ogee or Orton-Gillingham, there's also a subcomponent of Wilson Reading, or the Wilson Reading System. You could use the Wilson Reading System if you haven't gone through all the Ogee or Orton-Gillingham training. It's very prescriptive, step by step. It's used for struggling readers. They have a primary grades version, which is Foundations. It's a multisensory program, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and tactile sensory learning. And this is something that could be used K-12. But an Ogee practitioner or somebody who's certified could also do Wilson. You couldn't necessarily be using Wilson and use Ogee without the certification. So you could use one but not the other. And these are programs that, for Wilson, we have at least one person in every school who's been trained in Wilson. And there's a growing need to have more and more teachers, so that's something we've been working on, deploying more of those resources, as well as having more teachers trained in Orton-Gillingham. For example, this year we had a special educator who signed on, and part of the understanding was, being a first-year teacher, that they would go and get trained in Orton-Gillingham. So they spent a week taking the classes, and now they're into their practicum and going forward. So it was kind of like an understanding of employment. So we're trying to build up our capacity at all the schools. There were probably, I would say, out of the 17, maybe 8 to 9. We went about halfway through our schools of having both Wilson and Orton-Gillingham in all the schools. So if you look to the third page in your packet, it kind of gives an overview of multisensory education, where it started, the two people who put it together, a combination of an educator and a psychologist who put together basically targeting some reading instruction for students with dyslexia. So just to go through your packet, this is the overview of Orton-Gillingham and Wilson. Then I had your little language-based disability definition, and then this landscape version of print shows the history of that.
How many years have we been using the Ogee system and also the WRS system?
I couldn't give you an exact year. I'd have to go back and check with Chris Breen. We spoke about it last week, so I don't have a time frame, but I know we've been working diligently to add more OGE trained teachers, so, but if you'd like to know, I can ask.
I'm just curious ballpark. I don't need like the exact date it
Yep.
started, but, um,
I do have a question. How many teachers do you think we may need for this training? You said up to 4,000 per teacher. If we have, do we need 2? Do we need 5? Can you give me a ballpark figure on how many teachers we would need? How many do we have now, and how many we would need?
So I'll just speak in generalities. Again, I'd have to go back. So if we had 17 schools, and let's say there are 3 special educators at each school, and at least one is trained in Wilson and one is trained in Orton-Gillingham, and we're about halfway there, so half of 17 times 3. So we're getting there. I've also had some requests from teachers to have an overview of this Orton-Gillingham approach on our full PD days for all classroom teachers, so they have an idea of some of the techniques they use to help kids that are struggling within the classroom too.
And I do have one other question. Do you have those teachers now that's in Title I schools, or? Okay. Do you have them in non-Title I schools? They
Both.
okay, both, okay.
But I will, I'll double check with Chris Breen.
also, are these students who, is this exclusively for students who are learning disability identified through an IEP, or does a 504 also count? Or are there students who perhaps haven't been identified who are receiving this instruction?
Yes to all the above. So when kids are not responding to classroom instruction, there's usually 3 programs, and these are 2 of the 3: Wilson, Orton-Gillingham, and leveled LLI, or leveled literacy instruction. In non-title schools, the special educators do intervention groups where kids come in who don't necessarily have an IEP and get help and support in little target groups, and they may be in that group for a longer period of time or a shorter period of time. Other schools, you could have a special education student who's getting this through their IEP and their delivered service on a regular basis. You could have title teachers who have been exposed to some of the training and using it during kind of their tier 2 or push-in time with teachers. So in the end, all of these programs are designed around what's working best for kids. So LLI is typically for students who are 2 grade levels below. If they're not responding to that, that's when the practitioners would bring in some of the Wilson, some of Foundations, some of Orton-Gillingham, and try to unpack what's the secret code to get kids reading again.
Is there a threshold for the other 2? Because you said we have LLI, OG, and WRS. And for LLI, 2 grade levels below, is there a threshold for trying one of the other systems, or is it more student individually focused?
It could be prescribed in their IEP, but really it comes down to the wisdom of the teacher and making sure whatever's best interest of the kid and making progress. They use a mix of all these, or if one kid's cruising along through just getting LLI, then we keep on cruising.
Excellent. Mrs. Van Twyver has arrived, which makes us very happy. Oh, Miss Van Twyver, I apologize.
You apologize for what?
Oh, I said Mrs. again. I apologize for saying Mrs. instead of Miss Van Twyver.
Oh, you'll get it sooner or later.
I will. I will learn. So let me bring you your gavel.
Was there some reason to change the location of the meeting and not tell anybody about it? Dottie?
Nashville High North Boardroom.
Sure does say that, but why would you not mention if you made a change from the standard place?
Daddy, wasn't it said that all meetings were being held at the North from the last meeting forward? That's why I knew all meetings.
I'm sorry.
I'll say, I never heard that. Did you hear that?
Yes.
Well, I'm very sorry. I'm late.
So we,
Must have been during one of those long-winded conversations that I was ignoring.
so we started at 7:15, so we're only about 10 minutes in. We've just begun speaking about the Ogee and the WRS systems, and I know that you typically have a list of questions, so I
I
certainly,
have no questions.
okay.
Continue.
And then I'll just go to the last sheet here that speaks mainly to the Wilson Reading System. So for Tier 1, one of this, we talked about a reading or a literacy pilot next year in elementary classrooms. We're looking to bring in some phonological, phonics-based instruction for kids. So Foundations would be one of the ones that we're looking to bring in, both for a pilot in K-3. We do have some teachers that are trained, and if you look at this cute little triangle diagram here, the advanced stage in Tier 2, you have to have training in Tier 1, this bottom part of the triangle, in order to participate in that. So we'll be checking out both of those two little portions of the triangle. It's the best way I could describe it. So all of these are really meant for remediation, but the multi-sensory component of both of these are pieces that teachers bring into their reading instruction that works for a lot of kids. So again, when we look to our PD days, these may be some of the things that we offer workshops for all classroom teachers for those kids that are struggling in the early grades in K-2.
And so you said the Wilson reading is for all grades, whereas the Ogee is mostly for the elementary level, or did I mishear you?
I'm going back to my sheet.
From grade 2 to 12.
And so I guess my question is, what does the Wilson do for those older grades? 'Cause I know we have a lot of focus on our K-3 kids, but what about those kids who are still below level when they're getting into middle school? Like, what specific interventions are we seeing that are different than maybe what didn't work in the elementary levels?
Could you just say your question one more time?
So I'm curious about what we're doing to catch up those kids who didn't get caught up in elementary.
Okay.
So
So we're looking at the middle school and building up our capacity there for intervention. We have usually at most middle schools a math and a reading, and for them to target the number of kids at those schools, it is a challenge. But I know at least at each middle, they're trained in Wilson, and we do have teachers getting trained in Norton Gillingham. But I think when you look at the schedule at the middle school, it's hard to remediate the challenge of kids being behind when they're only in a block schedule for only one shot dose. So looking long-term, some of the challenges that we need to address is training, more time with students, and then having more reading assessments beyond iReady as the means of seeing how kids are doing. And that's something that the middle school group is looking at now. Because right now, their main focus is iReady, and they use the iReady toolbox for remediation for kids, but we're also looking for other good quality instruction pieces like LLI or in Gillingham, Wilson, and looking at the results from the benchmark assessment system that we do K-5.
any idea when they're going to have some suggestions? Or is this a brand new topic?
Is it a brand new topic? Yes, it's something they've been working on, the ELA steering committee, so I'm going to have something by June. When we have our June data meeting and plans going forward, they're operating under the assumption right now they need to have another reading assessment ready to go for next year for all kids. Because when I was in the middle school and the department head, we would screen all kids with a reading assessment, and then when we saw kids that weren't doing well, we gave them a second assessment to kind of troubleshoot where things were going awry, if you will. So we're looking to do something similar to that beyond just iReady.
Okay. With all our budget process, we had so many presentations, especially from staff, about how some of our kids they kind of fall behind, and then I feel like we're not catching them up. And then by the time they get into high school, I feel like some of them are spinning their wheels. And so I just feel like we need to focus on those kids to make sure that they're getting what they need as well. So,
Could I just,
I'm sorry, Mrs. Hohensee?
Thank you. I'd like to know how many kids we have in the middle school and high school that are being worked on in terms of catching them up on reading. Is it a small problem? I mean, just to get a handle on the magnitude of what we're working with?
I don't have the numbers with me, but I can find out and get back to you. So how many kids at the middle school level?
Well, like for the elementary, the middle school, and the high school, so what's the progression? Are we conquering it mostly in reading problems in elementary school? Do some of them slip through the cracks or come in, to our middle schools, late without going through the elementary school? What's the profile of, where is our problems that we should be focusing on?
Okay, I can bring that back.
Thank you.
Good.
And also, I like the, yeah, the transition from middle school to high school. How would that work when we already have a person that's below grade level when reading? How's that transition into high school? Would it pick up from the time that they left middle school into high school? How does that transition work? Or that's the end of it, once they get to high school and they have to rely on credits?
So I could speak to the elementary, the middle.
You can't. Well,
the high school
then
part.
again, what is the transition from elementary to middle?
So right now, we do have a transition process in place. The teachers in fifth grade make recommendations to the middle school for classes and everything else, and the guidance counselors go up and meet with the guidance counselors up there to help with scheduling. At our K-8 curriculum meetings, we've been talking by content of our ELA specialists, talking with the humanities coach at the middle school of how we can bring the data that we have from our writing portfolios, the reading assessments they've done at the elementary level to the middle school to help inform them in their practice. So like anything else, the good news is, like a lot of middle schools don't have support in reading at the middle school. We do have that. It's just a matter of refining it and probably building capacity for some kids of getting a bigger dose than what they need. And we also have some sixth grade teachers who are very interested in attending the elementary PD this summer, so they know about what's going on and they understand the results and they can incorporate that into what they do at the middle school. So we're trying to bridge the gap so the transition isn't as big for kids.
Thank you.
Yep.
Ms. Van Twyver, did you want to take over calling on people? Because that would, okay. Mrs. Hohensee?
Thank you. I just had a question. About a year or so ago, we had a middle school teacher in the audience that came and spoke to us, and her concern was the students going from middle school to high school. Now, if a student is not reading, all of their grades will slip. And this teacher told us that the students know that even if they fail all their courses, they will be promoted. Is that been addressed, or is that still an issue that faces our district?
That's the first time I'm hearing of that, but I can talk to the administrators. So you're saying if they don't do well in all their classes?
The teacher said to the board, she said it's very disappointing because the students know if they get an F in every single course, they know they're going to be promoted anyway. And she was frustrated and came to us and said, what are we doing about the problem? So I would imagine if they're not doing well in reading, everything would snowball. So that's probably the source of a lot of the problems. So I just wanted to know if we've addressed that or where do we stand?
I'd have to come back with some more information. Was that at a particular level, middle, high school?
It
Or?
was middle going in.
The high.
Yeah, it was middle school
High? Okay.
graduating from each year and then eventually going into high, each level of promotion in the middle school.
Okay.
She was a middle school teacher.
Ms. Van Twyver?
It has also been a practice for third graders, too, who don't do well. They just keep promoting them.
My understanding is that the district is not holding any students back. If I'm incorrect about that, I would love to be corrected. But my understanding has been, at least as long as I've lived here, for just almost a decade, that we don't hold our children back. If they're not meeting end-of-year expectations, they go to the next year and just, we kind of snowball them. And it's something that is concerning to me. So.
That's true. They push them through, and it's when they get to the high school, when they don't get their credits, then that's when they really fall behind. There's no consequences, I would say, in the middle schools or even in the lower grades. You just push them through, And so when they get to the high school and they realize that they really have to perform, it's too late. So, that's across the board. So, I don't know.
I don't think any system's perfect, but I've worked in another state where there was high stakes and 70 was passing, and if you didn't get a passing grade, you went to summer academy. And you took 3 times to take the state test. If you didn't pass, you were retained. And the flip side of systems like that is you get grades that are maybe inflated or not reflective of actual learning. You get students who are not invested necessarily in the learning, but just invested in the grade and the stamp to move on. So while no system's perfect, I'm happy to look back into what you're sharing and also bringing the retention policy and the policies around, promotion for students as well. So we can have a kind of a happy medium.
All right, thank you. I mean, I agree. Socially, there are consequences when children stay back too long, but at the same time, I do think it's worth looking into in our district to make sure that that as we're using these programs, that we're getting effective results and we're not losing kids. I hate to see those kids who get to high school and or even graduate from high school and don't feel like they have the skills to move forward. So I had another question about the language-based learning disabilities. Are most of our kids getting I'm going to say coded, but that's not the word I want, for an IEP before they're coming to school? Are they coming, starting at age 3 or 4 and coming in with an IEP? Are they being identified in 1st or 2nd grade? Is there a trend to when kids are starting to get an IEP or a 504 around this particular issue?
Well, that's a tough one to answer. I don't know if there's necessarily a pattern or a trend. We try to do early intervention, so give kids what they need early, and then not to push towards identification until like 3rd grade, around that area. It certainly is possible kids come into the district with a variety of needs, so it's certainly possible that kids come in. We could have kids coming from early intervention right into kindergarten or preschool that have some significant needs, but just ballpark, out of the 11,000 kids that are in the district, you're talking maybe 600 have a learning disability or learning language-based disability. So you're not talking a very larger amount or a pattern or trend that's growing, and not necessarily all of those students would need something specific like that. So every student is a little unique.
Anyone else? No? Okay, please continue.
So can I move to the second topic on our agenda, or are there any other questions on Wilson or Morton Gillingham?
I'm prepared to move on. You had a thing in here about dyslexia. Is that part of the language-based learning disability information? Yeah. Okay. Anyone else with any other questions, or are we ready to move on? Okay, let's move on then. Thank you.
The second piece here is an update from the Next Generation Science Standards pilot. So the first page you have in your packet is a copy of the fall update, which I gave earlier this year during a curriculum meeting. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but it gives a picture of the history of the pilot, what we're piloting, some of the resources and the steps in terms of workshops, rubrics to rate the resources. If you look on page 2, this is a more detailed update. So we've had a number of teachers go to a 5-day NextGen teacher workshop where they build a deeper understanding of the strategies for 3-dimensional learning. 2 middle school science teachers and our middle school STEM coach have brought 20 middle school science teachers through the first 4 days of the training, and we have one more day of training coming up. They've adopted some of these strategies in their classroom. They have a better understanding, and they've been using this understanding for their conversations during their PLCs. Administrators at the middle school level have gone through a day and a half of NextGen workshops. 4 middle school administrators attended the workshop, And our STEM coach is being trained in the administrators training so that we can further have more administrators trained at the middle school level. So from the pilot resources, the 4 that we've had from Pearson, McGraw-Hill, Houghton Mifflin, Discovery Education, the vendors have completed our rubric to give evidence around the standards so we can kind of vet the quality of the resources that we have. And they've completed initial quotes for materials that we would need for starting at the middle school level, because that's where most of our capacity is, right? We have teachers trained, we have admin trained, and that would be where we would begin. So kind of our next steps are completing the teacher workshops this week, plan for training for next year. So if we're hiring new teachers, what does that look like? How do we get them off to steps to success in the beginning? Planning for ongoing support for teachers through next year, training more admin through next year, and then reviewing the resources, the rubrics, and the pilot. And then we would be coming to the board in May to present a recommendation for some of those materials, along with a plan for supporting both the resource and the teachers throughout next year. And then thinking beyond that of how do we bring this NextGen PD and understanding to the elementary level. And just to frame your understanding, this is a lot of good quality instruction practice. It's less and less about teachers lecturing, but more about presenting a phenomenon of a problem or a dilemma to kids or an event that happens in nature and guiding their inquiry through questions and letting the kids kind of take the onus. So they have a higher engagement, they do a lot of the thinking and working. The teachers who have gone and the administrators have brought back that it's, again, good quality teaching, but also the engagement for kids goes to a much higher level than just the traditional scientific method or a lecture that happens on some experiment. The kids are really the ones who are doing most of the thinking and problem solving.
Well, I'll respond. I love this. I'm kind of a geeky science person. I'm married to an engineer. Like, this is completely right up my alley. So I think that's great. I'd love to hear at some point from just students and how they actually, like, is there a way to ask them, like, how did this go for you? Do you like it? How parents feel about this, if we've seen any kids more engaged in science as a result of this. I was very moved at our last meeting by the young man who had nominated his teacher from the CTE program for the state award. I thought that was wonderful. And I'm wondering if we're moving any other kids, or if kids are like, yeah, the teachers love it, but we're meh. So I'm wondering if we have any feedback about that.
We can bring something forth. We just had our science steering committee. They met this afternoon. It's the first time they've met in 2 years, so it was kind of reforming and bringing that together. We actually used one of the protocols they use as part of Next Generation in terms of brainstorming together on the whiteboard in terms of our next steps. So I can reconnect with them and bring some of this feedback forward. I think based on my meeting with the 10 to 12 teachers are there, they're hoping that we can bring this to the board and the board would support moving this work forward because they're getting excited about the possibility of K-12 kind of instruction shifting to less lecture, more engagement, student thinking. So I can have both students and parent feedback available to you.
Thank you. Mr. Guarino?
I have a question about textbooks, and I know you have here that science resource pilots. I think it was like a year ago or so that when the pilot was first, I wasn't on the board, but there were some teachers that said that the science textbooks were decades old. So it looks like that the textbooks have been updated, and that's going across the board. New science textbooks for all the students?
That would be part of the pilot at the middle school level. I think part of the challenge in looking I think at one of our board meetings, somebody had brought up the textbook adoption schedule before. So I had gone through and asked the office to go through and audit that, and I have an update coming, I think maybe our next curriculum evaluation meeting. I guess the two questions in regards just to textbooks, if I could talk about that for a section, is our curriculum management plan has expired, but then I see that this textbook adoption continued. So I guess the question was, should we keep buying and investing in textbooks if we're not getting the results we want? Or should the two be together? We evaluate our curriculum, and then we buy the textbooks that get us the results. So I see them putting them together into one document going forward. But part of doing that, the challenge has been we've done so many things. Usually most schools do a rotation where they do math, 1 year science. We've been doing things piecemeal, so it's hard to even it out when elementaries had an adoption 1 year and middle schools had an adoption somewhere else. So I'm trying to kind of find a way that I can make it work within the budget that we have and have it equitable. So the answer to your question, and they spoke about it today, this would be investment in the middle school level. They are behind in getting some new resources. There was a gentleman from Pennachuck who was speaking to, it's been 10 to 12 years, so they do need some updated materials. And then after that, also being at that committee, the science resources are another area of concern. They have a hodgepodge of materials all over the place. Not everybody has the same kits at the same levels. They have concerns around storage, so there's more work. We only had 2 meetings scheduled, and I said to them, I think we're going to need another meeting before the end of the year to sort some of this out. So we'll probably meet in May and in June. Yeah. And then there was just one last thing, sorry, a high school teacher who was speaking to the need of science textbooks at the high school as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Sometimes it seems it's a lot more complicated. There's a lot of logistics behind it, sounds like. Yeah. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. I know in our budget, we have 75,000 for books this year. And most times when we buy books, it's measured in the hundreds of thousands. And last year we spent 588,000. So I don't know where we're going to find the money for this. That's my first concern. And the second, you're talking about going from the middle school to the elementary school. Does that mean the high school is not where we're going because they have their own individual courses, so it's not adaptable to this? And I don't know, well, you were in the district last year. When this passed, it was a pilot. It was kind of marginally supported. There was funding that we had to go through with the pilot, so the board acquiesced, but it was a very divided board on it. So I think the understanding was they were going to come back to the board and show us the value before we went to the next step. So I just hope that the assumption isn't that it's an automatic, that they're going to present and convince us that it has some value before we expand the pilot.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you could address some of those issues.
Like, could we just work backwards? Yes,
Sure.
Yes, I think they would be coming and could easily demonstrate the value of doing this and why it ties into our state standards and the accountability system. But yeah, I don't think there's the expectation of kind of just bypassing the process. But like anything else, there's investment in this kind of work, and they'd like to see it continue. So they'll be presenting that as well. What was the question before that? I'm sorry.
So will it ever go to the high school, or are our high school courses AP modular and already separate from this? And then I guess it's the cost of where we're getting the money to pull a rabbit out of a hat to buy textbooks.
So at the high school level, they have their UBD units and some of the textbooks that they have, so they can build around this framework for teaching. They don't necessarily need the level of resources that were there based on the conversation I had today, and that was only one meeting. But that's something we'll evaluate going forward. But they do want an opportunity, they haven't met in 2 years, to go back, revisit the units, revisit their assessments, and then present recommendations for resources. Why go to the elementary is there's a need for more resources, more consistency, and awareness of the professional development. So if we can have our STEM coach trained who can train the teachers and the administrators and help out the high school level, then we'll have a K-12 continuum.
But we're going to initially start solidifying the middle school and then going to the elementary, and then finally the high school will be the third component?
I would say the elementary and the high school would be happening at the same time.
Okay, because you don't mention the high school in here at all.
we work through the department head, so it would be happening just the same, but I can bring back a high school update if that's something you need specifics on.
Yeah, because I'd like to know
Mhm.
which courses are exempt, because I would think the APs, they have their own curriculum. They shouldn't be altered, or the kids don't do well on their tests.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
And what was the first thing you said?
Well, I don't know where we're going to get the money for any of this, because we only have 75,000 in our FY19 budget.
I think, depending on the cost that I get back from some of these, I anticipate living within the budget that we already have. If it's not a one-year adoption, then maybe it's split over 2 years.
Okay.
I'm curious about how much extra work this is for our teachers. Are they creating, if we roll it out, are we asking them to create entirely new lesson plans? Is there a lot of extra kind of effort involved in this kind of teaching? Because it seems hard.
Well, that's a nice question. I think, like anything else, it's navigating the change, giving up some ownership of your classroom, being willing to not be the presenter of information, but be the facilitator of learning, and let kids have some of the opportunities to present their thoughts and not expressing judgment to all of them, and being more neutral and saying that's one possibility. Can we think of another possibility? Sometimes they do an experiment and they'll ask kids, what's going on here? So they brainstorm and ask students to generate a list. So I think the change there for teachers is, if you've always been doing it one way, are you willing to try it a different way? And it may not go beautifully the first time, but what went well and what can you build on, and what didn't go well and how can you change that? And they're lucky they have a highly skilled STEM coach who can come in, model lessons, give them feedback, go to your PLC, try different things, write a lesson together as a group. So I do think they have a lot of nice supports in place. So, but that change process, I think you're correct, it does take some time.
Good.
Thank you. There's one other thing I was thinking. I know that they revise the standards from time to time at the state. I was wondering if we had a schedule for when they're doing the revision. I don't think they're going to do science right away, but I think they're revising some of them. So if we knew when they're revising them before, so our investment in textbooks doesn't, it might be short-sighted. We want to make sure that we've got a perspective of where the state is going if we're following suit with what they're doing. I know that they're going to redo the civics standards, or they're looking at them. They might do the math and ELA, and then the science would be below that. But if they could give us a schedule of what they're doing, because I would hate to invest in textbooks and then like 6 months later find out there's a new set of standards in any particular subject based on, just so that we can operate in sync if things are going to change.
Two things to that. I think an investment in good teaching is always a solid investment. And two, the SAS system that New Hampshire has signed on to is, I think, good for 5 to 7 years. So I don't anticipate any changes happening anyway to the science standards right now. And the NextGen science standards are the state standards. So it would seem unlikely they would enter into an agreement for the accountability system to be very different than the standards that the state has adopted.
Well, my understanding, when they were going from the SBAC to the SAS, and they put out their RFP, it was with the understanding that it would be the same standards initially, but there would be a migration over the term of the contract. So the SAS is not necessarily going to be the same from year to year if the standards are changing. That was how it was explained to me.
I will check with the state and bring that back.
I appreciate that.
Yep.
Anyone else? No? Okay. That's, oh. Nope, still doing it. That's our entire agenda. Was there anything else you wanted to update us on? Do you have any other questions? No? Okay. Ms. Van Twyver, did you have an update for next month, or anything that you wanted to say before we conclude the meeting? No? Okay. I guess I'll second that. Do we have consensus? I believe we can forego roll since we can all see each other. Any objections to adjourning?
You vote on it, but you can do it vocally.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be a roll call.
Thank you, Mrs. Hohensee. All in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Aye, excellent. So we are adjourned at 7:54 PM. Thank you. Oh, 6:54 PM.